Okay, thank you, Sam. The next speaker is Iris Bloom, Executive Director of Protecting Our Waters. She's known in Philadelphia and nationally for her tireless activism around the issue of fracking. She's a strong advocate for communities and individuals who have had their livelihoods and health destroyed by gas extraction. And you can check out protectingourwaters.com for very, very frequent articles and updates about the threat that fracking poses to our environment and our health, in addition to information about how to get involved in the struggle. So, Iris.
So I'm really happy to see you all here today, and I know that this is the sleepy time of afternoon, so I'm going to try to keep this fairly vivid and engaging, and so if you find that you're getting sleepy, just interrupt me instead and ask a question. So I wanted to just start by mentioning that the industry loves talking about hydraulic fracturing as if that's the only thing we're worried about, is the actual the fracturing phase, the moment where there's vertical and horizontal drilling, or actually just the fracking phase deep underground. And they love showing how there's 70,000 layers of cement and steel in between the hole in the ground, and how deep underground and far away the horizontal drilling is from the ground level aquifers. And that is an example of the messaging spin and the access that they have, that they've been really fairly successful in defining the issue as if that's the only problem. So I just want to be really clear, when we're talking about the issue, we're talking about shale gas development. We're talking about the extraction phase, which includes drilling in the fracturing phase, the processing, the distribution, and use. And when you combine all that together, that's when you actually find out that in the life cycle, when you look at life cycle impacts of shale gas development, it's actually 20% worse to twice as bad on the 20-year time frame than coal for climate. And I think that Tracy might also go into this a little bit more, but I just want to make sure people are really clear that that's the reality, that this is worse for climate than even coal. So that's when you look at the whole life cycle of this industry. And the similar impacts are, the same thing is true when you look at air, water, health, and community impacts. That is when you look at the entire range of impacts from this industry, the heavy toxic industrialization of not only Pennsylvania, but many other states across the country. So I want to just back up and talk a little bit. I'm kind of like a Debbie Downer of the day. I'm going to talk about death for a little while here, because that is what it comes down to, and then go through kind of a sequence of argument leading to the activism that we are involved in right now, so that it gets more exciting at the end, but it starts out with a real downer. So I want to just talk about climate and death for a minute, and then I'm going to talk about fracking and death. My cousin lives on Staten Island, and she knew two friends that died in Hurricane Sandy. And one of them, you've probably heard a lot about the impacts of Hurricane Sandy, but you might not have heard about this one. People were told to go into their basements because that's the safe place to be. Because if you're above ground, you're more likely to get hit by trees coming down and all that crazy stuff. So this couple was in their basement. When the wall of water came down, it came down so fast that by the time they realized they had to get out of the basement, they couldn't go up the normal way back up into the house because there was so much water on top of them already. There was a basement door that went directly to the outside. So the woman opened that door, got to the outside, because it's completely underwater, and the force of the wall of water slammed the door shut on her husband. So that she got out, she got up to the surface, she asked for there's rescue workers right there. There's firefighters, rescue workers, and so like 3 men tried to open that door and they couldn't, and her husband drowned. So that's what climate change is really doing to us. It's, you know, it's drought here, it's hurricanes there. I don't need to, I'm sure you're all fully educated about it, but it's here, it's now. Fracking is killing people in very different ways. I was in shale country yesterday in Lycoming County, and I know a lot about the health impacts of fracking on residents and on workers, and I can talk about that a little bit because it's very disturbing. But the other deaths that we don't hear about are deaths like this one. A friend of ours who is actually in this book, her name is Carol French. She's a dairy farmer in Pennsylvania. We brought her to speak here at Shale Gas Outrage, big demonstration, press conference and demonstration last September, so some of you may have heard her. And in addition to her own water having gone bad, in addition to her own daughter having gotten very sick from exposure to that water, in addition to her livelihood being at risk. And what we're hearing now is a level of despair that it's increasing. It's beyond kind of what we've seen before. So we're hearing people in western Pennsylvania and north central talking about having to leave their homes and saying kind of in the next breath, or maybe I'll commit suicide. So that's kind of what we're hearing. So, but in addition to that, in addition to the impacts on her, she had rented a room on her farm to a worker who is, you know, doing one of these jobs in the fracking industry where he had to clean the Rubbermaid. They have these Rubbermaid surfaces that they put on the frac pads, and they get saturated with chemicals, and they're going to reuse them on another frac pad. So workers are cleaning them off. So he had that kind of job, cleaning up spills, spraying down surfaces that have been saturated by fracking flowback, and standing where his boots were in chemicals all day long. So he got rashes all over his body, and it's between the noise, the chemicals, and the 100-hour weeks. Some of these workers are pretty well paid. This guy was paid like $170,000. And he's just under 30, so in his mind he's doing pretty good. But his life is so miserable from the work that his boss says, here's some bath salts. I don't know if you guys have heard of bath salts, but it's the drug of choice in Bradford County right now, which is one of the heaviest drilled counties in Pennsylvania. So his supervisor, right, is saying, here, take some bath salts. You know, it'll make you better functioning on your job. So the guy committed suicide. There's a very high level of suicide amongst gas drilling workers and amongst people on bath salts, and that's the correlation. Even the coroner in Bradford County went on TV to say, hey people, there's this wave of suicides, and the people are ages like 30 to 50. That is not the normal age for people to be committing suicide. So there are these ways in which communities and families are being fractured as the earth is being fractured, as these chemicals are being injected into our groundwater and into our air, and it's not okay. And we've known for years that it's not okay, and we've been fighting like hell, as Sam mentioned. And as you may know, sometimes people forget this, but we are not fracked right here in the Delaware River Basin. And that's because we got over 100,000 people to comment. We got people to go to the Delaware River Basin Commission time after time after time. It's also because we had 15 busloads of people ready to go and a massive direct action civil disobedience planned for November 2011 when they were trying to lift the moratorium. And they canceled that vote. They just canceled that vote. So we won. That's still an incremental victory, but it means that we're not fracked here in the Delaware River Basin, even while our neighbors, very close neighbors, Susquehanna County, Bradford County, Lycoming County, all of the Susquehanna River Basin is being fracked, and western Pennsylvania is being fracked. So we have put the industry on the defensive. That's a victory, and I think that's really important. So I want to mention a couple of ways in which we have put them on the defensive, because it's easy to get discouraged and feel despairing and feel like we're not getting anywhere when actually we are. So Sam mentioned two things, in two ways in which they're on the defensive. One is, Prince's resignation actually came the day after 1,000 pages of data went public from a case in which a woman had to leave her home because the gas drilling fumes were so bad for her and her kids. She sued the industry, they settled, and then newspapers, this is the Stephanie Hallowich case, newspapers sued the court to unseal the records. And those newspapers finally won. So when those records were unsealed, I thought it was very interesting that Prancer resigned the next day. Very interesting. We don't know yet. The dust hasn't settled from his resignation. He may be trying to get on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in order to keep Act 13 in place. So it could get even worse. You know, sometimes when things that look like a victory turn out to be a defeat, and vice versa, in the roller coaster anti-fracking movement. But the fact is, Cranston has been on the defensive day after day after day since the day he took office, and that is our credit. Dr. Shaw canceling his speaking engagement on Friday, same thing. The DRBC canceling their vote because we had such an incredible array of opposition, same thing, defensiveness. Another thing that is really important to realize is that we've won on Act 13 as of now. So we have kept Act 13 that stripped municipal rights across the state of Pennsylvania. We've kept it from taking place. It's been overruled by the Commonwealth Court. Forgive me if I'm going into the weeds too much, but just kind of listing some of these incremental victories that are really, really important. When you see headlines like environmentalists and large corporations, you know, these longtime adversaries sat down together and are agreeing on these wonderful standards to make fracking better, I'm sure your bullshit meters are going off, ding, 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 because those are not real environmentalists, as I'm sure you probably realize. Those are the corporate environmentalists, many of whom take money from the gas industry, sitting down with the industry, giant multinational corporations, actually, not just the fracking industry, but Shell and Chevron. They weren't sitting down with the drillers that are doing the harm every day in Pennsylvania. That wasn't Range Cabot, Chief, Rex, Talisman, all these companies that are actually fracking Pennsylvania. It was just the big guys that they sat down with. That's not a regulatory process. That is voluntary. Those are voluntary standards that they're talking about. And so the entire rest of the environmental movement and public health movement and consumer rights movement and property rights movement and human rights movement, which is anti-fracking, is very much up in arms and issuing our own statements and saying this doesn't support, this doesn't represent us at all. So I wanted to, this is, you know, there's a lot to cover here. Anybody have 5 more minutes?
Just about.
You guys still awake?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Because the Q&A is going to be the best part. But what I wanted to put out is coming back to the connection for a minute between fracking and climate. One of the things that has been happening for the past long time is that energy companies like to try to say, well, you know, this kind of fossil fuel is bad, but this kind of fossil fuel is good. So all that clean coal stuff was an example of that. Then they're trying to say that fracking is a bridge fuel, you know, oil is really bad, and, you know, okay, maybe coal now is really bad, but, you know, fracking is really good for climate. All of that attempt to kind of greenwash fracking is continuing. And what's really happening is that people are starting to understand that methane is such a more potent greenhouse gas than CO2 on the 20-year time frame, that the science is showing that fracking is much worse. And I wanted to just go over one number with you so that if you get into these discussions with people, you really get it and you can back it up. The number is 105. So methane is 105 times more potent a greenhouse gas on the 20-year time frame than CO2. And that number comes from NASA, that, you know, lefty political organization, NASA. So Drew Shindell is a NASA scientist, came up with that when he looked at all the factors that show how methane impacts climate. And that's the number that's used by Howard and Graffia in their Cornell study of the life cycle shale gas impact on the shale gas footprint on climate. And we think that the next time the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change convenes, that's the number they're going to adopt. So Clean Air Council in Philadelphia, not so radical and lefty. They're very science-oriented, very law-oriented. They're using that number now, now that they've looked into the research. So that's very important to understand. We have methane, and the other thing that's important to understand is that methane is leaking from not just the drilling phase and not just the fracking phase, but from the compressor stations, from the pipelines, from the distribution phase, from the, when they export it, it leaks even more. So it's leaking at every stage, and it's also leaking from our city streets. Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, San Francisco, all these gas pipelines. If you've seen that image of the graph that shows these sky-high, methane spikes coming up from old gas pipelines, you add all that up, and the latest study showed a 9% leakage rate. And that's what they can measure. It's very hard to measure this stuff. So on the ground, in the acute impacts, homes have blown up from methane leaking. I don't know if you knew about that, but in Pennsylvania just a couple years ago, 2 homes blew up in McKean Township from underground methane migration. In one case, the guy's down in his basement and there's a spark. His home blows up. He has to go upstairs and put his wife's on fire. He has to put the fire out on his wife so that he can take her to the hospital. Another guy's home blew up while he's standing out in the driveway drinking a cup of coffee. That's from methane migration. So the acute impacts are incredible, and they hush it up real fast. Those should have been huge, bold headlines, but they kind of managed to hush it up. But the long-term cumulative impacts are what we really have to worry about. A lot of times when people are talking about how we're going to stop fracking, people kind of say, oh, well, something really big has to happen. And it's like, no, something really big is already happening, and we have to stop it now. So some of the things that we have been doing activism-wise, in addition to putting all these government officials and all these industries on the defensive, has been direct action. We had more blockades last year than ever before. It was pretty exciting. Shannon State Forest blockade at Riverdale when 32 families were being evicted to make way for a water withdrawal facility. Blockades this year include the tree sit to stop the Tennessee gas pipeline. There was already a blockade last Monday where Senator Steingraber was arrested in New York State as trying to stop a toxic gas storage facility. So the energy level's going up. We need you on our blogs and listservs if you can stand the onslaught of information and alerts, because this movement is a fast-developing, fast-breaking movement all the time. So if you're not already on Learn More lists, please jump on today. Protecting Our Water sign-up sheet is on your way out. And there's a letter to the Susquehanna River Basin Commission we'd love for you to sign that's over there on the way out. We have both a list and a blog. The blog, as Jim mentioned, is protectingourwaters.com. And there's news that shows up there that doesn't show up anywhere else. Last week there was a blowout. This week there was a compressor station fire. This week there was an elderly couple evacuated from who had to get out from their home because they were passing out from gas fumes inside their own home. All that kind of news is there, and you're not seeing it in the Philadelphia Inquirer, are you? But also the alerts are there, and there's always a lot to do. September 25th, 26th, the shale gas industry CEOs are coming back to Philadelphia, so we hope you'll put that on your calendar way ahead of time. We don't know yet exactly what we're doing, but we're going to be doing something big and interesting. And before I close, I just want to mention one more thing, which is that the extreme energy extraction movement is coming together now in a way that it never has. So people who are working on tar sands, people working on mountaintop removal, people working on fracking, people working on uranium mining, people working on supporting indigenous populations that are among the most badly affected in terms of environmental racism, which is rampant. are really coming together now and converging in ways that we haven't before, and we think that's really powerful, because we know that the right, you know, they, well, we know how the right operates. I don't need to tell you how the Koch brothers operates. So the more unity that we have, the better, and I feel like we're actually getting there. So we'll save the rest of anything I had to say for Q&A, and please try to get these shale stories on the way out if you can, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Iris. Next, I would like to introduce Tracy Confer, who is co-director of Energy Justice Network. Tracy's political activity involves supporting communities impacted by polluting energies and wasteful technologies. In addition to community organizing with Energy Justice Network, she also provides the organization with support with research, computer training, and web and database development. She has served as co-director of Action PA, an environmental justice organization, the coordinator of the Student Environmental Action Coalition Speakers Bureau, and as secretary to the Green Party of Philadelphia. So, Tracy, thank you.
You were expecting Mike Ewall probably. He was our director. I'm not normally one who does presentations, so but you got me instead. I'm actually not going to talk a lot about fracking. I'm going to be talking about the larger picture, energy usage in the U.S. So, but first I'll tell you about the group. Energy Justice Network has three major things that it does. One is we create and maintain an online interactive map of dirty power facilities, ranging from nuclear power plants, coal plants, biomass burners, trash burners. We recently imported, oh wait, no, that's on my to-do list. We're going to import very soon sewage sludge incineration data set. We have landfills in there. We're trying to cover everything about the dirty energy world in that map. Another thing that we do is we try to move other environmental groups to realize that these things that they think are wonderful are actually trouble, like biomass. I mean, does everyone think of, oh, they're going to burn grass when you think of biomass? Because that's what I heard in college. Biomass, burn switchgrass. Okay. Really, biomass is burning trash, sludge, animals, animal poop, a lot of things that are very dirty and polluting. So we have been, for years and years, trying to get other larger groups who have more access to policymakers to realize the things that they think are good or not, including ethanol, including natural gas. So the way that we actually work against these things is by creating networks of people who are actually fighting them in their communities. We thought of this idea back in the late 90s when there was a rash of natural gas power plant proposals. They were hoping to build 40 new natural gas power plants across the state, and most of them, especially the ones in rural areas and where people had resources to fight them, got beaten. Some of them, including two near Philly, one on each side of Chester, Pennsylvania, those got built. And that boom was over so fast that we really didn't have time to organize and network around that at the time. But it planted the seed of an idea, and we developed that with the new coal plant. Don't know if you remember, maybe 7 years ago. There was this idea that, coal's great and we've got lots of it. We should build new clean coal power plants. And so we got an intern who spent an entire summer digging up contacts in local communities and recruiting them onto an email list, and they kicked ass. So not many new coal plants got built, and that's partly because of our network. So we've got networks like that around biomass burners and coal, and we had the first anti-nuclear email list on the web. It started in 1995, I believe. So one thing that I'll leave in the back of the room is a sign-up sheet. If you're interested in any of these email networks, please give us your contact info and I'll add it.